All right, so our next speaker is Dr. Phyllis Brooks. I'm very excited to have her with us, mostly because she has a very different approach to treating ADHD. Dr. Brooks, thanks for joining us. And I would love to have you speak a little bit just on your outlook on ADHD treatment and how it differs from the norm.
Okay, I'd be happy to. Yeah, I've been doing this work for about 35 years, and so I've had a chance to watch a lot of kids and a lot of adults with ADHD and various other diagnoses or combinations of diagnoses. And one of the common things that I find is there's a whole neurological component to it that isn't addressed a lot of places. So I like to pay attention to that. And I do a very well-rounded approach. So I'm looking at the the biochemistry, and I'm looking at allergies and nutrition and emotional work and neurological and structural work, so that I can get a really big picture. Because if you've eaten a lot of sugar, or if you do a lot of caffeine, your behavior and your ability to focus can vary dramatically from when you're not doing something like that. So I have to look at all the factors that look like ADHD and see if that's really ADHD or if it's coming from somewhere else. So I like to use this well-rounded approach, because people are complicated, and who you are one day, you may not show up as exactly the same person the next day or the next hour.
Right, and I really, a lot of the science in the industry is really catching up to what you've been doing for a long time, because now we're hearing so many people talk about gut health and
Right.
how that relates to ADHD, and also just how ADHD children especially tend to be just more sensitive in general, and how their nervous systems can be more sensitive.
Right. They're also, the thing I love about working with ADHD children and adults is they're so creative, and they so think outside the box, and they are so not boring. And, at this stage of my life, as I said, I've flunked retirement twice. I've tried to retire, but I just can't, because there are so many people that are begging for answers and so on. So I just have to keep working. So
That's great. It's great that you're so passionate about your work and about helping people.
yeah, yeah.
So, I mean, I'd love to hear a little more just about the difference. I mean, what do you do with emotions, for instance? Is that, what in terms of if you're eliminating different things that could be ADHD?
Well, and when I look at the emotions, if you look in the world of acupuncture or Eastern medicine, with every organ is an emotion that's associated with that.
Right.
So if somebody is very impatient or very angry, I look to see if there's a liver imbalance, because liver deals with toxicity, and the way we get that toxicity out of our system is with anger or heat. So when you have a heated discussion, or when that's going on, you know that the liver is having to work too hard. So then you go, why is the liver working hard? Is it what he's eating? Is it what's in the environment? Or is it something in the family situation that there's anger that has nowhere to go? And so that's just one thing. Like, they're looking at the emotions. So when I'm looking at the emotions, then I have to figure out, I have this thing called neuro emotional technique. So if I'm, for instance, working on somebody with allergies, I might find out what an allergen is, and then I'm going to say, is there an emotional component to this allergen? And then I have a technique where I can go in and we find out, is it your emotion or is it somebody else? And it's usually in your family of origin, but it could be from other places. And then you say, is there an age when you took on this pattern? And it's usually fascinating, because the body knows, but consciously we may not be aware of it, but somewhere in this intelligent system of ours, there's a part of us that knows exactly what's going on, but we don't always have access to it. So this is a tool that I have to get into the emotions, and why is the emotion being disrupted, and so on. So I can figure out what the emotional component was. Here's an extreme example, but I had a kid who was about 27 or 28 at the time. He had a lot of diagnoses, but he was also very violent. So his anger, he was had the explosive anger. And his parents, his mom was actually afraid for her life at times. And so she and the mother and the daughter wanted him institutionalized because they were afraid of him, because of his anger, the emotional outbursts. And the father met me and he said, my gut just says you can help. So I started asking questions, and it turned out he was a really good soccer player. And by the age of 15, his father could remember having taken him to the emergency ward at least 5 times for headers, for soccer injuries.
Right.
Well, I said, before you do anything else in the emotional realm, and before you would think about going to a mental institution, let me just work on the concussions and the allergies and so on. So we worked on the concussions because I said, I'll tell you, it's all over the literature. When you have more than one concussion, your cortisol, which is how your body reacts to stress, is going to be too high. And your serotonin, which deals with depression and feeling good, is going to be way too low. And I said, if you go to a mental institution, they are not going to pay any attention to that. But what if a lot of the problems coming from unresolved concussions? And what if it's coming from allergies? And I said, at least let's rule out those variables. So I have people flying in and I work on them for 5 days, intense, off and on all day long for like 5 days. And then we usually have these big breakthroughs. So on day 4, this kid could not make eye contact with me. He wasn't depressed. He wasn't angry. He was more like on the depressed side. He really couldn't make eye contact. And finally, out of desperation, I said, so what did you eat yesterday? And he said, fish. Like, that's good for you, isn't it? And I go, well, usually it is, but let's see in your case. So then I did the allergy testing, and it turned out he was very allergic to fish. And then I said, let's see if there's an emotional component to it. And what the emotion said was around the age of 12, that there was something about loss. It was a big issue around loss, but it wasn't his, it was his mother's. Now, and he said, without missing a beat, he said, I can tell you exactly what that is. I can tell you exactly. At 2:00 on one afternoon, my mom picked me up from school and we went to my house, and there were IRS agents or somebody around our house with guns. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but that was his perception.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, and my mother said she wanted to die in that house. She loved it so much. I said, okay. And I said, do you think you ate fish for dinner that night? Because it was still, because I'm sure, because in his mind had connected the emotional overlay of all of this stuff with what he was eating or what he was breathing. And so the mind made a connection that didn't belong there, but it was playing out every day of his life. And so when we finished the 5 days, that was in March, in both Thanksgiving and Christmas, I got 3 texts from his father saying, thanks for giving our son back to us. He's got a purpose, he's got a direction, he's on track with things. And it was due to the allergies and the concussion work.
That's amazing.
But then, yeah, so he was diagnosed, but he was being like without looking at the whole picture of why he was angry and why his life wasn't working. Because what I learned is the body is always telling us the truth. It might be telling us the wrong time, or it might be telling us in some convoluted way, but there's always a message in there. And our job is to go in and decode what it is that you really need.
That's amazing. Yeah. No, I know you talk a lot about diet, and I want to get to that as well. But I'd like to ask you first, what are some of the ways that you do tap into the body and tap into when you're working with a patient or a client? What are some ways that you tap into the body's wisdom, that what their body is trying to tell you?
Well, I've been doing this for almost 40 years, and like anything, you get good at. So it's almost, people think that I'm psychic or clairvoyant. It's like, no, I've just been doing it for so long. I can almost, see, and there are certain patterns that I recognize after a while, but I use a lot of applied kinesiology. So it's muscle testing, and the muscle testing is a way of asking the body questions without asking the intellect. It's going more to the gut instinct and the part that precedes the words. So I'm not asking you to rationally tell me what's going on. I'm asking your body in its wisdom to say, give me a yes or give me a no, so that I can start asking questions. And your body is like a big antenna and a lie detector test, so we can go in and find out what, so I use a lot of kinesiology and muscle testing. And then I have a whole protocol that I've developed over years and that deals with a lot of the neurological issues, like why the signals are, why an ADHD person says when they do something impulsive, you do something and you didn't think about it, and somebody says to you, why did you do that? And you go, they don't have an answer because honestly, you didn't think about it. It didn't go through a filter system up here. It comes from a certain part of the brain that deal with the parietal lobes that deal with motor and motor inhibition. And when you don't inhibit the motor inhibition, you'll act without thinking, or you'll interrupt somebody because you can't not interrupt because of something going on in your brain. So I have these ways of figuring out what parts of the brain are affected. And then especially like the parietal lobe for like that part of motor inhibition for ADHD. And then there are ways we can do gentle, very gentle moves. It looks a little, it's like a butterfly kiss or very like acupressure. You do this light pressure, this light movement. So you can sort of not remold the brain, but help open up the places where it's been congested and let the blood flow go through where it's supposed to. And then one of the most common things that people say when they've come in for care is, my kid or I am calmer. I'm just calmer. I'm sleeping better. I'm not as reactive as I was. And it's almost like they get a center that it was there, they just didn't have access to it.
That's amazing. Yeah, those slight adjustments to me sound a lot like osteopathy, or that manipulation of blood flow, like you said, to the brain.
It is partly osteopathy. There's a division called cranial sacral work, or
Yes.
I'm trained in the chiropractic world, we'll call it sacral occipital technique. In the osteopathic world, they call it cranial sacral. But I've trained under both chiropractors and osteopaths, but it is very much like that. It's this very subtle, very gentle move where you have to, as the doctor, I have to relax. It's not me judging the outcome. My job is to really listen and then to follow your pattern and then shift it. So it's really, if you've ever had it done, it's beautiful, almost blissful work that helps get the blood flow going the way it's supposed to. And your body is so relieved when that happens, because it finally, because you sometimes can't, you can tell yourself to do something, but your body doesn't always cooperate. And so when we do this kind of work, it really helps the body listen to itself better.
Yes. And I know another thing I've been told many times is that when the blood is not flowing, it short circuits the body's ability to heal, which can create all kinds of other issues.
All other kinds of side effect things. There's a little, I do a lot of work with dentists too, because there's always a TMJ issue about when there's a learning issue going on. The bones all around here that deal with learning are next to the TMJ or the jawbone. So we have to go in and work on that too. And one of my holistic dentist friends works with sort of these sleep apnea devices. And he said, it's amazing how many other health issues resolve when the tongue is in the right place and the person can breathe correctly.
Right.
So you're not like, your body is not in a fight or flight or survival. Is it getting enough oxygen? And when it can relax, then a lot of other good things happen as well.
It's fascinating. It's really fascinating.
Yeah,
well,
I think so. That's why I flunked retirement twice. I just can't quit.
Well, there's nothing wrong with being passionate about what you do.
Yeah.
I do want to leave time too to talk about the nutrition aspect, because I know that's so important. I know you talk a lot about the effects of sugar on ADD and ADHD. Could you speak to that a little bit as well?
Yes, I say sugar is kind of evil, or it can be, because it can short circuit your system, and it's almost like cocaine, because if you've been off sugar for a while and you get on it, it's almost like you're sniffing around because your body wants it. And again, it's not a logical thing. So our brain actually needs sugar. A lot of the processes in the Krebs cycle in the brain revolve around the body breaking down sugar, but it doesn't mean white table sugar. So when people are craving sugar, there's usually some deficit, some problem going on, and sugar is the short-term solution to it. So, but what it does, and then it creates more of a chasm. So sugar is one thing, But wheat and dairy, and we hear so much about the gut biome these days, but when your body has an allergy to something, when it doesn't process the food correctly, on a primitive level, the body says, when it sees an allergen coming, it's like the enemy, and it said, no problem, I've got you covered. And it's good, like in those Elizabethan times where the guy carries a sword and his big protection in front of him. The body does it, it says, I'll protect you. But it does that at the expense of a lot of other normal body functions. So a body has to go into a fight or flight response. And so the normal functions don't happen. So people don't function as well. They don't get the energy to their brain. They're not, excuse me, they're not breathing correctly, but mostly, and there's like inflammation. So they're fighting within themselves, and it makes them not very pleasant people to be around, because they're on the inside, there's this war going on. And it has to do with whatever the food or the allergen is that's having its way with you. And so it's amazing when I work with people and I say, like, to get off sugar, and like for 3 weeks, if you could try to not eat wheat, dairy, and sugar. And people first look at you in stark terror, like, what would I eat? Because it's such a big part of our diet. But it's amazing how it calms the system, and how many times people lose weight and they just feel calmer. So I think eating a diet, the good diet in general, gives you the proper energy and the proper sustenance so that you don't need caffeine or sugar to quick start your system. But what the problem with ADHD is, you want the answers right away. And so when things are going to take time, when you're going to do them naturally, people with ADHD or even bipolar, it's like they'll do it for a while, but they get pretty impatient.
Right.
And then, so getting them to follow through on a long-term slow solution is a good trick.
Yes. And when you talk about sugar and caffeine and things, I mean, I know so many ADHD people now were raised on stimulants, we're medicated. And I think that can be another component
Yes.
where it's very hard, because sugar and caffeine are also a stimulant. Maybe they came off their medication, but they're still using these stimulants.
Well, and for a lot of times, a person with ADHD, when he has caffeine or Coca-Cola, that's what they think normal feels like. That's what they think other people feel like all the time. Because when they do that, the caffeine actually helps them focus. It
Right.
does the opposite of what it does for some other people.
Yes.
And so they go out there and they're going, I'm sure glad coffee is legal because I need it. And a lot of my the guys who are really in high tech, and they use Coca-Cola or caffeine because they have to be concentrating for long periods of time. And nobody wants to do that.
Right.
So that it's like a drug that helps you focus. And so it's not Ritalin or Adderall or something else, but it's an outside influence because you don't know how to control it yourself, or you're not capable of doing it on the inside. And I think you told me that you started taking medications as a child.
Yes.
And so what happens for kids is they never learn how to self-regulate. They're taught at the age of 10 or whatever, when they start taking the drug does the regulating for them. But when you get off the drug, you might as well be 8 or 10 years old again, because you never learned how to do that. And now you got to make up time, and you're adult, and you can't always have something like that. Now, I have people that graduated college, and as long as they played sports or they had an outlet for a lot of their energy, they were okay. When they graduated and they were expected to sit in a desk, that didn't work very well.
Right. No, I can relate to a lot through my personal experience. I found, like, one of our big sayings is that pills don't teach skills. It's not that we're
Oh, that's good.
not that we're against medication per se, but I found, personally, that coming off my medication in my early 20s, I had no skills, and I had to basically go back and refill in through all my 20s, kind of fill in all the skills that I didn't make in childhood. In terms of figuring out ways to cope with our differences, with how,
Yes. Did you ever play an instrument as a child, a musical instrument?
early on I did, and I got into sports after that, so I was very
Oh,
athletic.
good.
Right.
Excellent, because that's a good use of your energy. Because a lot of times with ADHD, there's explosive energy, but you have to learn how to channel it,
Yes.
because otherwise it's going to go in too many directions. But you need to learn, and sports is a good way to do that.
And another thing that they're finding, just in the last 5 to 10 years is just how important the cerebellum is to
Oh,
focus and attention. And sports really help with anything that deals with balance, that deals with hand-eye coordination, does a lot to help in that arena as well, to help with the cerebellum.
good for you. Because the cerebellum, it was it was out of fashion for a long time, then it was in fashion, and then it was out of fashion, and now there's so much great research about how all these higher forms, these higher cognitive forms, have to loop back through what we thought was a primitive system, this cerebellum, in order for your cognitive, your thinking ability to work well. And so sports is a great way to get that cerebellum. The cerebellum deals with motion and car sickness, or not car sickness, but just your and your ability to move
Right.
and to
Balance.
move well.
Yeah.
Right. So the cerebellum is really, really important.
Yeah, even as adult, I mean, I'm here in Hawaii, and I find that when I surf in the morning, my attention works better for the rest of the day.
Exactly. There's a great book called Spark, and it's written by one of the ADD gurus. And he said, exercise can replace almost all the drugs that we're taking. And he shows all these studies that show, like for depression and anxiety and so on, exercise, like serious exercise. And he says first thing in the morning is best, and it sets the tone for the day.
That's 100% true, I think, yes.
Right.
So,
And so he's got study after study after study showing that exercise could replace antidepressants, anxiety, it could replace anxiety drugs. It's like, wow, that's really, and it's free.
yes, and helps your longevity and helps in so many other ways in terms of enjoyment of life as well.
Totally, totally. And surfing, I think, is an extra thing because you really have to balance. It's not like running where the ground is flat. When you're surfing, you're having to really work with the waves. So
Very much.
you and every second that cerebellum is, with every step, it's getting new information.
I preach that all the time. That and salt water. I think salt water is healing. I don't know why specifically, but I think salt water is one of those things that can heal just about anything.
I think it's from the ocean.
Right.
A mother's placenta is basically salt water. It's one of nature's big healers. For women with constipation, drinking salt water in the morning is great. If you exercise and you can still get dehydrated, but if you put a little salt in the water, it keeps you hydrated better.
Yes,
So I'm a big believer in salt water, and I'm a big believer in natural remedies because they don't have side effects.
that's true. Yes.
Yeah. So you're in a perfect place for your situation.
Yes, Hawaii is very healing. Well, I think that's all incredible information, and I really appreciate it. I'm aware that we're kind of getting towards the end of our time, and I want to leave time to talk about allergies. I know you touched on the allergies, like around your client that had a fish allergy. I'm wondering, so when you find an allergy, what are some things that you can do?
Oh, I have this lovely way of treating allergies. So there's no shots involved. There's no staying away from a food, except the way I'm treating it is you're going to hold this whatever it is you're allergic to, or I have little bottles that sort of have it all encapsulated in a bottle, and I'm going to tap down your spine like chiropractic, except I'm just tapping, and acupressure instead of acupuncture. I'm going to be rubbing spaces, and what that does is unclog the information that couldn't get through to a certain organ. And so when I can tap on the spine, because between the spine is the information that goes to different nerves and different organs in the body. And when I rub the places, it's a form of acupuncture, which also unclogs a meridian or an energy flow. So we do that, and then I rub on these spots, and then you hold it for 20 minutes, and then for 25 hours, for a day plus an hour. If I'm treating eggs, you're not going to eat anything with eggs or chicken in it. And after that, I want you to, and it takes like 48 hours before I can retest to make sure it cleared your system. And usually it does, because what happened is in 24 hours, your body goes through every organ. There are 12 major organs, and each organ has 2 hours when it does its prime time. So when we say to stay away from it for 25 hours, it's like a catalog. So it works on the liver, then it goes to the small intestine, then it works through all the major organs. And in 25 hours, it's pretty much reprogrammed the system. So your body says, huh, according to this information, I've got new data, you sort of updated the system. And so it can delete the old program. And so after that, eggs aren't an issue anymore. If it's still an issue after the first time, I go in and look and see if there's an emotional component to it. And then once we get the emotion cleared, the allergy is usually gone. And so it's really
Incredible.
lovely because people don't have to live with allergies.
That's amazing. That's really
Yeah.
incredible.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you sharing your wealth of knowledge with us. I want to remind everybody that Dr. Brooks's page is up on the Summit website. You can link to her page if you're interested in talking to her more. Dr. Brooks, we really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. A pleasure to be there. And if any questions, please, anybody, feel free to contact me. At this age, I like to be a resource for people, however I can help. Thanks so much.
Thank you.